Sin más, vamos a continuar con nuestra tercera ponencia, que estará a cargo de Regina Bellow. Permítanme compartir pantalla para presentarles a Regina Bellow. Como les decía, Regina Bellow nos va a acompañar hoy en esta mañana con su charla titulada EM-DAT, documentando las pérdidas de desastres en el mundo y generando conocimiento. Ella nos acompaña desde Bélgica, desde otro uso horario, y va a dar la charla, corrígeme si me equivoco, Regina, en inglés. Brevemente les comparto su currículum. Ella es una gestora de base de datos y documentalista en el Centro para la Investigación de la Epidemiología de Desastres, por sus siglas en inglés CRED, que es parte de la Universidad Católica de Lovaina, en Bélgica, donde ha estado trabajando por más de 30 años. Como personal de apoyo técnico, ha estado implementando diferentes actividades en el mencionado centro, CRED, que es una referencia mundial en cuanto a la gestión de desastres, y está a cargo principalmente de la base de datos de eventos y de emergencias, por sus siglas en inglés, EM-DAT. Entonces, permítanme comprobar si Regina está preparada para la presentación. Regina, ¿estás con nosotros? Puedes comenzar a compartir tu presentación para que confirmemos que esté todo técnicamente en orden.
Do you see me?
Yeah, I see you perfectly. Regina,
Can you hear me?
The camera a little bit. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. So can you share your presentation with us to check if everything is all right?
What, I share my screen or?
The screen, right, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, I can see it perfectly. Just to let you know that you will have 35 minutes to do your presentation, and I will let you know when you have 5 minutes left. And if you're ready, we are ready to listen to you, and really grateful to have you with us today.
Thank you, Deborah. And hi to Carlos, who is somewhere that who has invited me.
Yeah, sure, he's following us.
I'm sure. So, so my presentation will be in 4 parts. So I will make first a short introduction on what is CRED, how EM-DAT and when EM-DAT has been implemented. And then I will go into more the methodology. So it means what are the different variables that we include, what are the validation process, how we collect the data, what are our criteria, and so on. Then I will present some products and services that we provide to the whole community, I will say. And then I will just finalize, if we have still some time, on just showing some trends which are based on our data. So CRED has been created within the Université Catholique de Louvain in Brussels in 1971, and it's and we are about a team of 5 to 10 people, depending the project which are ongoing. So the database has been created in 1988. Our objective with the EM-DAT database is to measure the occurrence and the impact of the natural, but also the technological disaster. It represents up to now more or less 24,000 records. We are collecting the data from the beginning of the previous century until now. Our coverage is global, so we are measuring the impact at a national, at the country level. we are using some inclusion criteria, and I will come later on this aspect. The EM-DAT project is mainly funded by the Office for Foreign Disaster Assistance of the United States. Just to mention that they are not only financing the database, they are over a series of other activities around the database. The objective is to provide evidence base to humanitarian and development actors at national and international level. And it is also a database which is publicly available. Now, to give you an overview of the disaster loss database at, let's say, at a global level. So there are currently 5 databases which are measuring the same variable. So it means the human and the economic impact at a national level. 2 have been built and established within research institution, from which you will find EM-DAT. There is another one in Karlsruhe, which is called CAT-DAT, and the 3 other ones are established and managed within insurance and reinsurance company. For the 2 most important ones are the one managed by Swiss Re and Munich Re. On the other side, it has probably been already mentioned during this conference, you have more or less 55 national or subnational databases who are measuring also the human and economic impact, but at a disaggregated level. So EM-DAT benefit also from a network of collaboration with a series of institutions. Here, just on this slide, we just showed you the, let's say, the main one with whom we were working in the last year. You see the UN agencies, governmental and multilateral agencies, non-governmental institutions, and also private companies. So what is a disaster? In EM-DAT, a disaster is a situation or event which overwhelms local capacity, necessitating a request to national or international level for external assistance, an unforeseen and often sudden event that causes great damages, destruction, and human suffering. So this slide shows you a little bit the process on how we collect the data. So when a disaster occurs, we are collecting the information coming from different sources of information. It can go from 1 to 10 to different sources of information, depending the reliability of the sources and the magnitude of the disaster. You can imagine that if you have really small scale disaster, you might use 1 or 2 sources, and for major disaster, you will have much more information. So all this information are compiled daily. And once it is updated, it goes into a validation process. The validation process is, the objective is to provide the most reliable data to the public. So it means that this database is not static. If you download the data today, the one of tomorrow will be different. So this is one important aspect when you are using the data, especially, of course, for the current year, is that the data will change. The second aspect is that EM-DAT is not a real-time database. So our objective is not to provide directly the data to the public, but to provide, once the compilation is finished, once the data is validated, the most reliable data to the public. Here, an overview of the different sources that we are using. They are all secondary sources, so it means that we are not making our own estimation. This is not, first of all, it's not our objective, and secondly, it's not feasible because we are dealing with over 180 countries in the world. We have set up a priority list which means that we give priority, as you see here on this slide, to the United Nations sources compared to the press. So the list, of course, is not exhaustive. It varies also depending where the disaster occur or the magnitude of the disaster. And at the other side, you have also other databases that we are using to or validate or complete our data. For the earthquake, for example, we are using the USGS databases. For the flood, the Damwood Flood Observatory database. For the volcano, Smithsonian Institution for the volcanism program, and for the epidemics, WHO. Again, this list is not exhaustive, but it is just to give you an idea. What about the inclusion criteria? So we don't include each single disaster. At least one of the following criteria must be fulfilled. 10 or more people reported killed, 100 or more reported affected, a call for international assistance, or a declaration of a state of emergency. Now we are going a little more into the methodology. Because I am working with EM-DAT since, yes, more or less 20 years. And one of the gap was that there was no standardization at all between the different databases, between the different sources of information. And we have set up in 2014 with the other disaster loss database holders a common terminology and classification for natural disasters. So you see here on the slide, we have divided this in 5 main groups: the geophysical, the hydrological, the meteorological, the climatological, the biological, and also the extraterrestrial, even if we have, I think, only 1 or 2 entry on the extraterrestrial. But the objective here was that we were all using the same language. In the past, we have tried to compare data set from EM-DAT with other database, and one of the conclusions was that we were not using the same terminology. One of the example can be in one database, a cold can be a cold wave, can be a freezing in another one. So we have tried that to agree on a common terminology with definition. So this document is available on our website, but also on the IRDR website, where you can find the complete document. So the methodology. We enter the disaster at 3 levels. First, the information on the event. Then the geographical and temporal information by country. It can be one country, but it can be also more than one country which has been affected by the same disaster. And then we enter these different sources of information. It can go from 1 to, as I said before, 5, 10 different sources of information, depending the reliability of the figure which are given. Once all this information is compiled, it goes into the validation process before we make the data available to the public. So here, this is just a concrete example. You have a flood which affected 2 countries, Brazil, Uruguay, and you see also the different sources which has been used. You see also here that the sources are not necessarily the same for each country. So now I will go a little more in detail, but not too much, in the different level of information and the different fields that we are including. So there is, of course, a unique ID number, which is attributed each time we have a new entry: the disaster group, subgroup, disaster type, the inclusion criteria, the event name, the glide number, which is another unique identifier number. DFO, GVP, USGS are also the corresponding ID in these three databases. Then we enter the geographical and temporal information. So it means, in other words, the start and the end date, the local time for the volcano and the earthquake, some physical characteristic like the origin of the disaster, the associated disasters. You might know that usually we are entering the triggering event, but we add also what were the associated disasters. Just take the current example, a flood which lead to landslides. We include the disaster magnitude, latitude, longitude, and the epicenter for the earthquake, and the river basin for floods. Some information on the status, whether or not OFDA has responded to the disaster or not, because they're funding the database. If there was an appeal for an international assistance or a declaration of emergency, and the aid contribution when we have the information. Then you see on the right of the screen, there is all the geographical information. So there is, in a text format, you type all the geographical information that you have on the region or the city or the province or the district which has been affected. And just below, you see there is, we have included in our data entry interface a georeferencing tool. So we are georeferencing, we are georeferencing our data since 2000 at the admin 1 and admin 2 level. Then at the third level is where we include all the figure we have on the human and the economic impact by sources. So you have the name of the source, the date, the type of the source, and also a reliability score. And then the different variables on the human impact, dead and missing, injured, homeless, affected. The economic impact, direct and indirect damage, insured losses, and also the reconstruction cost. You have also figures on the impact on the infrastructure. So it means how many houses, roads, health center or hospital, schools, which has been either damaged or destroyed. What were the different sectors which has been affected, like animals, industry, water sanitation, cultural infrastructure, and so on. The data entry interface allows since several years also to include directly the sources that we are using, either in a text format or in a PDF, which was not the case 10 years ago, where you have to print to file all this paper and also to retrieve after the information. So now that not all the source of information, but the most important one, are directly accessible also through the data entry interface, which is saving paper and also saving a lot of time, and really helpful when you want to check again your information or cross-check some data which has been given. And you have also a comments field where you can add any other information that you cannot include in the specific fields. So these are just the screenshot. So this is coming back again to the different definition of the human impact variables. In the same context as the disaster classification, we have worked with the same group, which was, if I remember at the time, including Munich Re, Swiss Re, IDRC, UNDP, to have a similar document as the classification and get an agreement on the standard of the human impact and the economic impact indicators. So this document is also available on the IRDR website. So this screen is just to give you an example of how it looks like when we want to validate the data. So you see on your left, you have the name of the sources and then all the figure which has been given. And at the end, the date, the reporting date, which is quite important because you don't receive the information in one shot. Sometimes you receive several reports. So the date of the reporting is quite important in the validation process. And it is from this screen that you validate the information that you will provide to the public. Well, here you see it's an old example because it was an earthquake, I think, in 1954 in Algeria. And just looking to the death column, you see that the figure were quite different from one source to the other one, which happened less now because there is a better reporting of the information. But for historical data, you have often this kind of variation in figures which are given. So this validation process is more or less made every month. So don't expect tomorrow to find the figure of an event which happens yesterday, for example. There is also yearly quality control and internal cross-error checking, which is usually happening at the end of each year. An event has to be confirmed at least by 2 sources, at least for the natural disasters, before we decided to make it public. Now the system, before the data set was uploaded every 3 months or every month, taking into consideration that it needs time to have really consolidated data. Now the validation is still made every month, but the system is running every night, so the change are much more frequent than it was before, and the process is automatic, so you have not necessarily to wait. So what makes the credibility of EM-DAT is we have more than 30 years experience in data collection and management. We have implemented a consistent methodology since the beginning, the creation of the database, including rules and definitions. We are completely transparent and automatized. So by transparency, it means that, as I told you before, we are using different sources of information. The one which are provided to the public is a kind of compilation of what we estimate to be the most reliable data. There are, of course, sometimes people who are coming saying, okay, what are the sources that we are using, or can we have access to this information? So we are completely open to share the information. So the thing is that when you go on our website, what you can download is just the most reliable data, and you don't have access to the sources. But we are completely open when the people are asking from where are you using our data, to share the information with them. And we have also implemented validation methods and tools to ensure the data reliability, which make our data comparable over time and space. So what are the strengths and the weaknesses? So one of the big strengths of EM-DAT is that it is the unique free accessible database in the world. Coming back to the 4 other one that I have mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, they are not open to the public. The private company, they have or another objective, other clients, and the access to this kind of database is completely restricted. We have also changed our policy in the last year, and since I think since last year now it is completely open and free, but not for the commercial purpose and the private companies. So after registration on our website and accepting the condition of use, you can just download the database. It acts also as a reference point for global analysis of disaster occurrence and impact. It is the unique basis for policy paper on disaster reduction and risk. It has an international recognition and credibility, and also the capacity to provide methods and guidelines. There are, of course, also weaknesses. As I told you, it's a global database, so we are measuring the effect at a country level. So we have limited potential for analysis in terms of disaster occurrence and impact on smaller intra-country spatial scale. In more simple words, we have not disaggregated data, for example, by province or by district, such as this inventor. And also the public aspect of EM-DAT may lead sometimes to inappropriate use of data. So what is the evidence is that in the last 30 years, there was an improvement of the information, and statistical data were much more available than in the previous time. So usually when the people are using our data, we recommend to use the last 30 or 40 years where there were, of course, much more better information. So there is an increase in the information itself, but also in data quality. But there is still, even if we have worked since the last 10 years with all these organizations to harmonize, to get standard and definition, one of the evidence at the beginning, it is less obvious now, but I think that with all these national and subnational database which are growing, there is still a lack of international consensus on best practices of data collection. As I say, a quality of a database can be only as good as a reporting system. If you don't have a good reporting system, then you cannot have good data and you don't have a good database. So there are still inconsistencies, data gaps, and ambiguity of the terminology that we have tried to solve with the work that we have done with our different partners. As I said, these were leading to some difficulties to compare different data sets and also to evaluate the disaster situation, which was an obstacle for disaster preparedness and planning. Of course, local sources are better reflecting the local picture. So one of the questions that the people are asking us is that why EM-DAT is not using the national and subnational databases. One of the main answers is that, first of all, ideally, there should be more than 180 national database, which is not the case. The second reason is that usually it is disaggregated data, and we need the data reaggregated at our level. So this is one of the issues. So it means that one event in EM-DAT might be, just take an example, an earthquake in Ecuador, it's at a specific date, it's one entry in EM-DAT. It might lead to maybe 20 entries in the database of Ecuador. So there must be a way to reaggregate the data in our level so we can then, of course, have valuable information and a much more clear and local picture. So what are the key problems is the intent behind the reporting data. So all the information that we are compiling are not gathered for statistical purposes. There is also the availability of the information according if there was humanitarian assistance or not. the accuracy of the data, the fragmented jurisdiction of a different type of disaster. There are still some issue with the date reporting, especially for long-term disaster like drought. Definition with different interpretation. One of the example is affected. Affected, it's a quite vague variable. In our work with coming to this common standardized indicators, affected was not recommended. But we have decided at CRED to keep it because the international community is asking for it, and it is finally the one which has maybe not the better coverage, but at least there is a coverage with these indicators. Also, the methods of evaluating damage, this is still, there is still a poor frequency and a poor reporting in EM-DAT. It's only 30 to 35% of all our natural disasters which have economic losses data. And also some issue with some geographical location when there is changes in national boundaries. So these were problems that we have identified, I think, 20 years ago. So there has been a lot of improvement in the way the data are collected and cross-checked and validated, but we are still facing some of this problem. So now coming to, so I have finished my part of the methodology. Here you see the three main group of users that we have. It's more or less, I will say, everybody. So we have classified this in three groups, because if you go on our website, you have first to register before getting access. So you have the group A, which is mainly the international communities. The group B, as you see, 75% are from the academic research sector. And third group, which is the group C, private companies who usually make a commercial use of our data. So as I said before, the group A and the group B has free and unlimited access after registration and acceptance of condition of use. And the group C have also to register. They have to accept a database license and pay an annual subscription of 6,000 euro per year. There is, I will not say a large demand of the group C, but it is increasing. And you can imagine that sometimes you have to negotiate with an institution like IBM. It's not an easy thing. But this process goes with our legal department at the university. We have also a mapping tool at national and subnational level, which is based on our reference data. Sorry, it is difficult to say. So this is just to show you some statistic on the number of visitors that we had in the last 10 years, which is quite stable, I will say. Some products which has been made in the last 20 years, mainly by international institutions like UNDRR, UNDP, the World Bank, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, and also some scientific article. Here it is internal application, so it means report that we are producing, and during a long time it was the international community who were using our data, and then we have also put some energy to provide our own report. So there are some annual ones like the natural disaster. This is a report that we launched every year. The human cost of disaster, economic loss, poverty and disaster are produced in collaboration with UNDRR. We produce also a CRED Crunch, which is a newsletter that we produce every 3 months and send to whoever wants and one is interested in different topics that we are bringing on this CRED Crunch.
Excuse me, Regina, you will have 5 minutes left, okay?
Okay, this is just perfect because my last slide is just to show you some outputs from our data. So here you have a global mapping tool which show you the occurrence. Again, I would like also to mention that with the mapping tool, we can only show the occurrence of the disaster because we don't have any disaggregated data for dead, affected, and so on. So this is a global mapping tool which show you the global occurrence from natural disaster from the previous century until now. This is the subnational mapping tool that we have launched a few months ago. Another example of showing the disaster impact, highlighting the countries with the highest occurrence, the occurrence by disaster type, sorry, a graph with the affected and dead by disaster type. Another kind of graph showing the main or major or the killiest disasters in the last 20 years. Another one showing the disaster dead by country. One of the first graph which has been used showing the trends of the natural disaster. You might all know that in the current context of climate change, everybody is saying, okay, the natural disasters are increasing. So, but you see that based on our data, you have to take into account that there was from 88 at the creation also a better reporting of the information, which make these trends going up. So the explanation of this increase is what I said, the false increase. There are more natural disasters which are reported now than before, especially for small disasters. There is also more media report, and the information is better captured than before. And we are planning now to get into this automatized data collection. So we are in a investigation source because so until now it's in a way in a manual capture, it's one person who is collecting all this data, and to increase the coverage of our data, first to see if there is a gap to fill in. We are looking now to use other tools to automatize the data collection. There is a real increase, is the increase of the vulnerability and also of the exposed population, and a real increase of extreme natural disaster event. Thank you.
Regina, thank you to you. Thanks a lot for such a clear a didactical and detailed presentation. I myself should tell you that I follow CRED publications, and especially I follow CRED Crunch, but I learned a lot from your presentation, and you summarize in a great way the high volume of information you manage, and the large number of sources of information, and how validation really takes time. And this is a great effort that you make to provide transparent and accessible information. That's the main, as you highlight, that's what makes you different from other databases, that you are the unique, free, accessible database. So I would like to ask you a couple of questions, and after the questions, I will summarize and translate into Spanish a little bit of your presentation. So okay. You mentioned a lot the changes in the database since the establishment more than 30 years ago, but can you again summarize a little bit what are the main improvements that you have in the database since its establishment?
Oh, I will not say there was a lot, but in the main one and in the most recent one, it was this classification.
Mm-hmm.
And this has not changed since 2014. I remember also we have made a huge work on the drought, because drought was an issue before. It was confusing because we have famine, but famine is not a disaster. It's a consequence of a drought situation or mismanagement or political reason, whatever. So we have cleaned up this set of 800 data, I think, to try to harmonize the drought data. Here, because it's also an important question, and it's also weaknesses in EM-DAT, is that epidemics and biological disasters are never really used. In any report, if you look, if you see, biological are always excluded. So we have not really focused now our energy to improve this epidemics data. Now with the COVID situation, you can imagine that now people are coming and say, yes, but why you have not COVID inside? And say, okay, no, but COVID is not an epidemic; it's a pandemic, and we will not find also AIDS data. And in any case, now there is I don't know how many websites who are reporting daily all the cases and death mortality data for the COVID. So all this questioning bring us now in this in the current agreement we have with USAID to focus our attention on two sectors. One will be the epidemics data, to clean up also all this data, improve the data we have, and also the economic losses, because they are still, as I told you, it's 35% of our data. So now we are really focusing our attention on these two type of disaster, let's say, or these two group of variables or disaster.
Okay, thank you so much, Regina, for this explanation. So, as you mentioned, this the evaluation of damages is a gap. There is a big gap, and you mentioned at the beginning that there are different kind of databases. Two main databases from research institutions, including yours, and three big databases from insurance companies.
Yeah.
And of course, apart from transparency and access, what are the main differences between the research institutions databases and the insurance companies, according to your opinion?
They have the expertise for the economic losses. This is one of the main, and we are using the data too. This is for us, it's the most reliable data for the economic losses. So they are, of course, post-assessment study made by the World Bank and ECLAC, which are quite complete and good, but it's just on main disaster. We are dealing with more or less 400 natural disasters per year.
Mm-hmm.
So so the data, when we can have it, because they have really restricted the reporting even of the information in the last years. Munich Re and Swiss Re are really they are the expert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very important to cooperate, even if it's, as you said, it's difficult to access the insurance data itself. And my last question is, what kind of data or variable you think is more complicated to validate, and why?
Affected.
Affected. Yeah, you already mentioned the definition.
Yes, affected because first, as I say, it's vague.
Yeah,
it's vague. It has different meanings, and it can be sometimes just exaggerated, just to get sometimes international assistance, which was the case, I think, a long time ago. For example, from some even in China, where they tend to amplify or exaggerate the number of affected to get more attention. But so it is quite subjective, this affected. We, in our working group, we were thinking of alternative like exposed, for example, exposed population. And it is where the georeferencing data that we have made can play a role, because what we were trying to measure, it was to have the footprint of the disaster of the different region which has been affected. Mm-hmm. So affected is always tricky.
Yeah, I agree. You already mentioned that the definition is very vague, so it's difficult to quantify. And
again, a person affected by a flood in Belgium is not the same as a person affected by a flood in India.
Yeah, that's it.
So sometimes we are, and sometimes the data are also not available. So here I have not explained all the methodology. It's available on our website, but sometimes you have to make your own, the estimation based on the number of houses destroyed or damaged, for example. Sometimes you don't have even this kind of information. So then you use, for example, displaced or evacuated person, which is also not the reflection of the reality, but it is better than nothing.
Sure. So one last question from our assistants online, Diego Reyes. Want to know, you already mentioned somehow the thing with the COVID. Why do you think there is no data available about COVID for Ecuador? Or the data are very variable? You mentioned already something about the different sources of information from COVID. Do you know specifically the case of Ecuador?
No. No, okay. Because we don't enter in any case the COVID. So
you already mentioned. And he want to know, okay, let's see. He's asking, what is the definition of CIP in the database?
Yes, it's the consumer price index. So this is a value that, because the economic losses are given at the time the disaster occur. So when you are making analysis, you have to put this at the current value, and the consumer price index is used to make to convert it at the current value.
Okay, so very specific question, and I'm glad that you give a specific answer as well. So, Regina, I think we ran out of time. Thank you so much for your explanation and for the detailed answers that you gave us. And I recommend everyone that follow CRED and CRED publications to learn more about this free and accessible database. I really thank you for being here with us, and I really hope we can have another presentation for you in the near future. So thank you again.
Thank you to you too, and it was really a pleasure.
Okay, so thank you, Regina.
Can I leave? Can I leave or?
Yep, you can leave if you want. Yep.
It's not that I'm not interested with Spanish and it's not. And secondly, I have to finish my work. So,
Totally understand, totally understand.
so good luck for the rest of the conference, and hello, Carlos, again.
Thank you so much again.
Bye, bye.
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 So, for everyone, let me translate a little bit the main points of Regina. Voy a pasar a hablar en castellano antes de pasar a nuestro próximo expositor, que ya lo veo que está esperando, Mario Ruiz, perdón por el retraso. Voy brevemente a resumir los principales puntos o cosas a destacar de la presentación de Regina. La base de datos EM-DAT se destaca por dos cosas principalmente. Primero, por su confiabilidad. Ellos usan una metodología muy clara y realizan unos controles de calidad muy estrictos, como nos ha explicado a detalle Regina, que garantiza la validez de la información que publican. Eso ha resultado en un nivel de credibilidad, de hecho en inglés la palabra sería credibility, con las siglas de la propia organización, CRED, y que es muy alto entre todos los usuarios alrededor del mundo. Además, como ha mencionado Regina, son la única base de datos totalmente transparente y libre. El acceso a los datos es muy importante. Este acceso fácil a los datos ha hecho que muchos usuarios lo usen para crear nuevo conocimiento y ha contribuido a convertir a la base de datos EM-DAT en la fuente referencial de datos de impacto de desastres a nivel mundial. Es importante señalar esto también para animar a los propios usuarios en Ecuador a tomarlo como referencia, ya que en Ecuador, lastimosamente, todavía falta bastante para desarrollar esta cultura del compartir información y datos y hacerlos accesibles a toda la población de manera fácil y rápida. Dicho esto, este pequeño resumen sobre la presentación de Regina.